for joining us, everyone. In the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to take a marine ecology tour of rocky intertidal shorelines in the western Prince William Sound, which was the location of the 1989 Exxon Valdez oil spill. And I think one of my main points is since 1990s, I have been entrusted with hundreds of repeated photos taken by dozens of people of intertidal marine life at former NOAA rocky study sites in the oiled area. That's 3.5 decades worth of photos. And right here you can see the palette of 36 years for one site called Mearns Rock. It's just Mearns Rock, I want to emphasize, is just one of about a half a dozen sites that have been the focus of annual repeated photos by myself, by Gary, and dozens of volunteers who I really want to acknowledge in this presentation. These photos, I think, show how much the rocky shore flora and fauna have changed from year to year, and how difficult it is to determine when sheltered rocky shorelines that have been impacted actually recover from a disaster, such as an oil spill. You're going to see some pretty messy graphs that make that point. I also want to point out this project inspired Valerie Chu to actually fly last summer on her summer vacation to Mearns Rock, and she'll talk about her experience. I think the photos demonstrate the importance of dedicated volunteers, and who I'll acknowledge in this presentation, as well as the importance of simply having time series photos of shoreline sites. So grab your boots and your camera and your rain gear, and let's get going. We're going to start with Gary and a brief review of the spill and response. Gary?
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. I have the relatively light duty today of simply providing a little history, some background, some context, because we just celebrated the 37th anniversary of the Exxon Valdez spill. And I'm guessing that probably half of our audience was not born at the time. Well, half our audience and 1/3 of our presenters were not born at the time of the spill. So it's always useful to review a little bit of the facts and figures part of this story. So you can see here the Exxon Valdez on March 24th, Good Friday, 1989. The Exxon Valdez was fully loaded at the Valdez Marine Terminal in Valdez, Alaska, at the terminus of the Alaska pipeline, and was loaded with actually 42 million gallons and was outbound when it turned to avoid ice in the shipping lanes and ran aground on Bly Reef in Prince William Sound and spilled approximately about a quarter of her cargo, around 11 million gallons, into the waters of Prince William Sound, which then initiated this large spill, large response. You can see the numbers, 3,000 square miles and 1,300 miles of fouled shoreline. And of course, a number of animals perished over the course of the spill. Next, Alan. So just to provide a little context, lately when I've been talking about the history of oil spills, I've been consulting the know-it-all Chat GPT. So go ahead and click, Alan. I asked Chat GPT, one of the largest oil spills to have occurred, marine oil spills. And you can see I highlighted the Exxon Valdez. It's kind of hard to read here, but the Exxon Valdez is number 19 out of the 20 largest spills that have been logged, at least by ChatGPT. So my point is that on a large scale, the Exxon Valdez is not a large spill by volume, but historically and in the context of how the US responds to oil spills, it was huge, just huge. So I think it's a good lesson to learn that bigger is not necessarily more important. So I think that still applies today. It depends on where the oil spills. Sensitive environments, certainly Prince William Sound is a sensitive environment. So the importance of these spills really is a little bit decoupled from the volume of oil spilled. Next, please. Now, Alan and I got involved primarily from the perspective of the cleanup and the cleanup on the shoreline. And here are a few facts and figures about the cleanup itself. There was a large effort to try to recover oil from the surface of the water, but a storm blew through shortly after the oil spilled and kind of rendered that whole effort a little bit moot. But what ensued was a very large, long-term shoreline cleanup, which took place over really 3 years, 1989 through 1991, and into 1992 as well. Next, Alan. And Alan and I got involved looking at the potential impacts of an aggressive shoreline treatment that employed the use of high pressure and hot water. During the course of that spill, our boss at the time, Dave Kennedy, expressed some concerns to the Coast Guard about the potential effects of such an aggressive cleanup technique on the shoreline. And the Coast Guard responded with, well, where's your references? Show us the proof that we might be doing more harm than the oil. So Dave helped to launch a shoreline monitoring program that compared the effects of oil versus the effects of cleanup. Key to this whole program that took place was having a series of designated unclean sites, oiled and unclean. And as you might imagine, during the course of an oil spill, the proposal to leave oil on the shoreline is a difficult argument to make, and it required a lot of justification. But in the end, we were allowed to have a handful of oiled and untreated sites, and these really proved key for us to understand both the effects of oil and the effects of the cleanup. In 1990, we took over a program that was begun by Exxon itself to look at the effects of both oil and cleanup on the shorelines. So really for a decade, from 1990 to 2000, we went out into Prince William Sound and visited a series of designated study sites. And I might add that beyond the year 2000, we continued to monitor some manipulative experiments that we also launched in conjunction with the shoreline monitoring program itself. So we really were out there for about 20 years trying to understand the effects of both oil and cleanup. Alan prepared this slide and he came up with a number of metrics at the bottom there. We went out quite often, 17 cruises. We had a number of scientists and visiting scientists. We took out, some of you may know Bob Payne from the University of Washington, one of the giants in marine ecology and marine biology. We took out visiting scientists from Japan. We took out students. So we tried to use it as a platform to involve a broader audience. As a result, we published a number of what we call technical memoranda that are NOAA publications that provided the results from the monitoring efforts, And then there were a number of peer-reviewed articles that came out and platform presentations as well. So it was a very rich platform for us to share our results to a broader audience. Next, please. Okay, so at the core of this, go ahead and click, Alan. The questions that really provided the underpinnings for the broader shoreline monitoring program centered on the question of recovery. How do you determine when an injured shoreline is recovered? And to cut to the chase, we basically concluded that a shoreline is recovered when it returns to the boundaries of natural variability that is affecting other sites in the system. So it's not necessarily convergence to a pre-spill reference point or to, Alan, can you go back one slide? Pre-spill reference point, or it's more looking at the larger system and looking at the ups and downs that are affecting all of the sites themselves. So we needed a way to try to measure and quantify and qualify variability. And that's what gets us to the whole concept of Mearns Rock, this idea that long-term photography can really help portray that. Next, please. So this kind of messy graphic shows the results from one thing that we looked at, an epibiotic algae called fucus, rockweed. And it just shows, go ahead and click through some of the bottom metrics there. Clearly, early on, we could see distinct differences across the different categories of sites. The unoiled controls, the oiled and untreated sites, and then the oiled and washed sites. So there were big differences. But as you might expect, as time went on and the effects of the oiling and the treatment diminished, then things began to converge back to some sort of reference point. And in this case, it's the range of natural variability that affects those sites. So we concluded that the initial impacts were most visible, as you might expect, in the first 2 or 3 years. But in the next 1 or 2 years after that, the sites recovered nicely. And then by 3 to 4 years after the spill, we were able to declare the shoreline sites that we monitored as basically recovered. And by recovered, we meant that they had gone back to the natural range of variability that was affecting all of the sites. I think there's one more box here to click, Alan. Yeah, so this also sets the stage for Dr. Mearns. Is 10 years really long enough to understand what that natural range of variability is and what it looks like? And so that's where Alan takes over.
Thank you, Gary. And during the first 10 years, I was walking around the sites taking pictures, and Gary said, "Hey, why are you taking pictures of that stupid Mearns Rock?" And I said, "I don't know." Well, it turns out that I'm glad we did, because that's one site that we were able to follow every year for many years, and using photography instead of this heavy-duty scientific approach. Repeated photography, I think, is visually compelling and inspiring. Everyone has a camera, can be done by citizens, even scientists, and taps into local knowledge once you have citizens involved in repeated photography. Plus, we have a permanent record that's really exciting to go back to, and so you see things in the older photos that you hadn't noticed before. So our the photography work continued for another two and a half decades. What we were after is photos showing the main features of each site. Primarily the rockweed, you can see in the upper left, and mussels along the bottom, and then barnacles. And these are foundational species that create habitat and food for dozens of others, such as the oyster catcher, sunstar, and whelks. So let's move on here. The other thing we can do with these photos is estimate percent cover of the different dominant species. And I've been doing this, not using chat or any other extreme analytical methods, but my own eyeball. After training myself at looking at percent cover estimates, I could go back to some of the photos and estimate percent cover. And here's 2 different years of Mearns Rock. With 1991, the rockweed cover was at least 90%. Couldn't see any mussels. 94, there was no rockweed. That's black area is not oil, that's mussels. About a 50% cover of the rock. So you're going to see some graphs coming up soon that actually show percent cover going up and down and up and down at this rock and at various other sites. Mearns Rock also, I want to point out, is just one again of about somewhere between 6 and 9 sites that we and volunteers have been able to visit over the past 3.5 decades. And I threw in this because this VW, because somebody wrote an article about how it's a VW sized rock. But there's a site where Mearns Rock is in a closer view. After the major NOAA project from 2001 to 2012, John Whitney, the scientific support coordinator in Alaska, and I went out every year for about 3 or 4 days visiting all 9 sites to the extent that we could. And we were always in the company of other people, families, Coast Guard folks, and so on that joined us for safety. And that program went on for about 10 years. And then we stopped. But colleagues continued to visit it. Here's photos of some of you may be in the audience. I know Dave Janka is. He is the primary person that has visited Mearns Rock in the past 2 decades. Scott Pagal from the Oil Spill Recovery Institute in Cordova has picked a couple of sites to visit every year. And then we had help from other scientists from other agencies, such as the USGS, and even John Houghton, who was the original photographer. I think Dave Janka took him out in 2010 to visit some of the sites. So all of these people continued to contribute photographs. And here I've done something that's maybe it's not quite scientific, but I think it gets the idea across. Here's a timeline going from 1990 all the way to 2025 of the percent cover of rockweed, mussels, barnacles, and filamentous algae on Mearns Rock, with some examples of the Mearns Rock scenes. And what you see here is the natural variability, up and down and up and down, with all species. It's pretty incredible. And you look at this and you wonder, well, what if there was an oil spill at, say, 2005? What would happen? How about if it was in 2008 2008 when there was hardly any rockweed present. And then it comes back. Are you going to call that recovery? So that's the main story with this graph. Um, in summary, rockweed abundance at Mearns Rock ranged from less than 5% in some years to over 90% in others. And there were 7 oscillations. When you go back to this graph, you can see up and down, there's 7 of them. With intervals of 4 to 5 years between the events of recruitment, growth, and die-off. Also, looking back, I hadn't noticed it until I started looking at the data this way, but there's a filamentous algal cover that started to come in. And you can see the light green there. And it stuck around longer than we'd like. There appeared to be increasing episodes of that cover. Mussels colonized the rock several times, but not always, 1992 to 95, and then a second episode in 2016, 2017 that Mr. Janka photographed. Sea stars were also observed in the area during the later years. But I want to jump from Mearns Rock to these other sites because they show other kinds of variability. These 2 boulders and so on. So let's go to that first one. Shelter Bay. There's 2 boulders that we ended up, actually a colleague of John Houghton's naming, Bert and Ernie. And they're right next to each other. They're about the size of Mearns Rock. And here's about 34 photos. There were some gaps taken by ourselves and various people. The cover of adult mussels peaked in 1993, 2003, 2010, and 2019. And there were many years in between where there were hardly any mussels. Absent, for example, in 97 and 2005. And here's just 2 blow-up images showing the different states of the cover. When the mussels aren't there, the rocks are pretty much covered with barnacles. And then here is my estimate of the variability of percent cover of mussels at not only this site, but 3 other sites as well. And I'm amazed at the concordance between these sites that are miles and miles apart in terms of the mussel recruitment. And there's a reason for that, which has been studied by the Gulf of Alaska Gulf Watch scientists, which have published a number of papers from their program. Here's another site. This is one of several control sites, and we weren't able to visit it as much as the other sites, but here's some close-ups from 2 different years. And here's an attempt to graph the percent cover. Again, highly variable over the 30-year period. Mussel Beach is a place that is well known to some of our volunteers. And it's got a gravel tombolo, which you see on the right, that was covered with mussels and then oil. And then the rocky site right above the gravel beach, and there's two rocks that we called splayed rocks. And when I look at the rockweed cover, it started out as nothing in 1990 after the big severe cleanup, and then slowly by 1995 it started to pick up increasing cover, and it continued with a big drop in period 2015 to 2017, then back up again in years later. So there's several things going on there that were not going on at the other sites. Here's another site. This is well known to Dave Janka. Split rock in a place called Northwest Bay. It's a rocky islet. It was heavily oiled and pressure washed in 1989. And basically, it took a while for the rockweed to reestablish itself and cover the entire surface of that rock. With heavy cover in 93, 97 to 2001, 2013, 2024. And here's my estimate. There's gaps in visiting the site, so I've just put dots instead of trying to connect them or interpolate what was going on in between. But again, you can see the variability with something on the order of a 5 to 10 year cycles and what was happening. Here's all of the stuff together, including sites that I haven't shown you yet. What a mess. This is for the rockweed cover at Mearns Rock, and then at 8 of the other sites as well. Looks like a spaghetti mess, and it actually is. And that's the natural variability we're dealing with. So imagine an oil spill somewhere in the middle of this time series, wiping out seaweed, or maybe not when there wasn't any present. It's very very confusing, very difficult to tell unless you do one thing, and that is monitor sites that were not oiled. And in fact, I think in Gary's program in the first decade, he and his scientists actually increased the number of unoiled sites so they could get a better handle on natural variability of rockweed, mussels, barnacles, and so on these rocky sites. So why the variability? That's not the purpose of this project. We're only providing images that make it easy to see the variability. There's a lot more to learn, and we need to go to the publications by the USGS and other local agency, Gulf Watch Alaska Nearshore Monitoring Program, which has been underway since 2007. They visit sites similar to ours, but they do not visit our sites, except in one case where I've got several of the people volunteered to visit one of our sites. And they've documented a whole lot of things that related to oceanography and climate change and so on. For example, a paper by Weitzman in 2001, the decline of rockweed and other algae increased cover of mussels was associated with a marine heat wave in the Gulf of Alaska. That paper has a lot of information about how that impacts rocky shorelines in the Gulf of Alaska, at least. Jim Bodkin also published a paper about mussels, and he found synchrony in the adult mussel populations at different sites. And I just showed you that we did as well in our sites. And there's a little graph that shows that marine heat wave. So I'm going to stop there. I'm sure you have a lot of questions, but I'm going to turn it over to Valerie.
All righty, I'm here to close it off. So, yes, I was not alive in 1989, but my mother was pregnant with me and my twin at the end of 89, so I existed in some form. Mearns Rock, for me, it was a trip of a pilgrimage of purpose, and it stands as a powerful symbol of resilience because it just represents one passionate scientist, and that is Alan, as long as many other scientists. And I have a very deep connection to Alan because I've known him for 14 years. Just in 2012, when I graduated from the University of Washington in Seattle, I came straight over to NOAA. And I needed to, and 2025 was a bad year. And I just knew I had to give some hope to the time right now and tell my colleagues that you successfully passed on your knowledge and your passion to me, and we'll make sure that there's a plan in 20 or 30 years. Next slide. So this is my travel itinerary. I went over from Seattle to Cordova on June 26th and through the 28th, and I got to spend some time with some navigational beacons, David Janka and Scott Pagot, and he couldn't be here today. And then I went on a 5-hour ferry ride to Whittier, Alaska, and that was the smallest town I've ever been to. It only sits at 253 people, all living in one building. And then I went over to Anchorage, and I went on a 4-hour float plane ride over to Mearns Rock on July 1st. Next slide. So Scott couldn't be here today, but he's freshly retired from the Prince William Sound Science Center's Oil Spill Recovery Institute. And David Janka, who's here today, is somebody I spent time with while I was in Cordova, Alaska. And their insights provided such valuable skill sets and complexities I had to navigate through these tough waters. Next slide. So Scott helped me arrange a flight over from Anchorage to Mearns Rock. And I got to say, that was the most beautiful and most breathtaking plane ride I've ever taken in my entire life. I am a crazy bird lady, and that's what I do in my free time. And I do even have a pet bird myself. And becoming a bird for 4 hours was the most incredible experience of my life. And flying over the Alaska wilderness, oh, that was just absolutely gorgeous. And it turned out to be the most valuable trip and most like, I was just very much in awe looking at this landscape and seeing such the beautiful scenery. And on the flight back from Mearns Rock, I saw two humpback whales along with the pilot and a tiny little speck that was a black bear. And I wish I could replay that flight over and over and over again. That made everything worth it. So next slide. So we do not have the 35-year graphic, but we do have the 25 years later graphic. And I can tell you 35, 36 years later, the Pacific herring still have not fully recovered in Prince William Sound. And it's ongoing research at the Prince William Sound Science Center. And marbled murrelets, their status was unknown 25 years later. But when I was over kayaking in Whittier, Alaska, I saw a bunch of them in the marine waters, and they have such an interesting ecology. They forage in the marine waters, and yet they nest in the old growth forests. And in the Pacific Northwest, they are listed as an endangered species as threatened. And they're also covered under the Northwest Forest Plan of 1993. Next slide. So, yes, both Alan and Gary passed on their knowledge and their passion to me, as well as many other generations. I mean, even Ecology Spills program, I think it's a requirement to take the science of oil spills class, and I've taken it twice. And I'm sure both of your talks are the highlights amongst those classes. And so you contributed to science and policy in the Salish Sea and beyond. The way you've done biomonitoring over the years, you've changed it ever since I was told by Sandy O'Neill over at the Toxics and Biota program over at WDFW that both of you came in after the spill and formed the program. And for Jim and Sandy's careers, with all the biomonitoring they've been doing over the years, was definitely inspired by you. And the fishing vessel Deep Sea, that spill happened a couple of months before I started over at NOAA. And I do know that pH data set over in those mussels is something that's still used by the Navy today. So you've definitely contributed to so much science and policy. And of course, OPA 90, that was the regulation that was passed as a result of the Exxon Valdez oil spill. And that law and all those regulations are still being used today. So the both of you have contributed so much to the science and policy that we do today. Next slide. So even with everything that could be walking against us, I just want to assure you that the future definitely does seem foggy, and I'm not giving up. I'm not giving up at all. And I encourage people to go out there, do some birding, do some ecological restoration, do any citizen science project and just collect the data and contribute it to the science, because we need all the help we can get at the moment. And I mean, you could even find your own rock. Alan, talk about Mearns Rock #2.
Well, about 12 years ago, my wife and I started visiting the jetty at Edmonds, 1 mile from my house. And I started doing photographs of scenes, and I'm going to call this one Mearns Rock 2. And in this case, we're able to do it seasonally instead of once a year. So I've got now hundreds of slides of amazing changes at this particular site that people walk by and have no idea what's going on with the marine life. But basically, it's declining. The cover of rockweed has disappeared in the past decade or so. I don't know why. Large barnacles are gone. And so we're going to keep up monitoring, at least photo monitoring, a couple of these sites at the Edmonds Jetty. And what concerns me the most about this is that I've been struggling through the literature trying to find more documentation of rocky intertidal photography time series, and it's hardly in Puget Sound and in the Straits of Juan de Fuca. And with a few exceptions, there hardly is any monitoring going on as far as I can tell. And certainly nobody's publishing long-term time series of changes in the rocky intertidal. So this is getting me to propose that some of you out there find your own rock, your own place, and start doing photo monitoring. Because I think you'll be amazed, and you'll get a better handle on how things are changing along our coast. I think we're going to wind it up here. I've got a long, rather incomplete list of all of the people that have helped either with the initial monitoring program in the 1990s, or helped John Whitney and I during the early 2000s, and the volunteers that went on their own, including people like David Janka, who's on line right now. So I want to thank all those folks. And I think this is the end. It is. I have 25 more slides, but we're not going to have time to show them. So that's that.
I appreciate that, Alan. And there's such a breadth of experience and knowledge that you all have. It is hard to condense it all in, but it's fun to see not only the data, but also the volunteering that really made all of that data possible. Again, welcome people to drop questions into the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand and ask a question, you are welcome, and I will then ask folks to unmute. It looked like Wayne maybe had a question, so if you want to unmute and add in.
Hello, Wayne. Audio?
I'm still right. I'm still here, but I'm hiding myself. You'll see how old I am.
Yeah, I couldn't do that.
So my comment was initially, and Gary, I think you probably remember this too, that Robin and Jeff Matthews and I looked at the data sets from the 1990s and stuff. And we could always tell the different sites apart from each other using the data analysis that we had. So we went through and did that. And this is why I often tell people there's no such thing as recovery. You just can't tell it apart because you're not using very good tools, number one. Number two, that the oiled versus the steam cleaned rocks, they actually fell into the same cluster. So you're going through and you're doing that, but because of the huge impact upon, even when you cleaned them, you steam cleaned them, the rocks had to start all over again, no matter where you were. So they tended to cluster together. The other things that were important in the clusters were actually location. Location, location, location. Even with the oil, you could tell what rocks came from what part of the sound. So that's what got me started on using all those multivariate tools to this day. And Valerie, you're and lots of you are aware of the Bayesian networks and all the statistics we use. And when you say that, Gary, I thought your note about now they look like what's historically variable. That's what the Forest Service uses as far as forestries are concerned. It's not a scientific value. Or can we tell impacted versus unimpacted? It just has to be in the historic range of variation within that site. To which my question always is, how much data do you have previous to the oil spill to actually know what the true variation is in these systems? And we know there's a lot. There was even, and we did work on the fjord of Port Valdez, and we had a starting point because the earthquake basically cleaned out the fjord. So we had a starting point, but that's pretty unusual. So when Tillman tells me, oh, it's within the historical range of variation, I go, how long have you been measuring? Of course, then the Forest Service guys, oh, about 100 years. I said, okay. But most places don't have that. So I think this is a key site for these long-term comparisons. And it always has influenced me. Someone says, my site's recovered. I go, what do you mean by recovery? I think that's a normative statement, not a scientific one. So that was my 2 cents. And I'm sure other people have comments about that as well.
Wayne, this is Alan. Do you have photo time series of your sites?
Not now. No. Would love. No, we don't. Usually what happens is that our sites are hard to take pictures of because they're covered by water, or they're just so large that we go by the Forest Service data, or in the case of California, their monitoring program that they have there that's been going on for 30 or 40 years. Mm-hmm. And almost never do we have any photographic data.
Right.
Almost never.
So the images that we've taken have been consumed a lot by just common, ordinary people. They look at it and they say, "Oh my gosh, just look what's happening." Yeah. So I guess I want to encourage more visual photography. I mean, we can do all the statistical analysis on hard data, but that confuses a lot of people that have to make decisions about the future of our shorelines and monitoring and so on.
So, Alan, I completely agree. And the photos are just as much data as what other people take. So often we see all the variation in someone's data sets. Come on, these photographs you've been taking probably have a lower error, a lower variability between each time compared to these people that go out over 20 years and who knows who they are and take data. And so I say that because we've seen these data sets. And Valerie, I see your smile because you know what I'm talking about. So I think the photography is just as good. And I think NASA just sent some people to the moon to take photography. I think they just did that. So I think it's pretty good. They're pretty good data sets.
And my stimulus are all the photos that geologists have taken of receding glaciers.
Absolutely.
There's a lot more of that than there is of anything in the intertidal zone.
Absolutely.
Well, great discussion about the complementary nature of some of these different approaches and methods. I want to give Laura an opportunity to ask her question, and then we'll go to Dave.
Great, thank you. So I put mine in the chat too. I have not, I've lived here, or at least part year, for about 15 years in Edmonds, and have gone down to the beach during low tides. Just became a habit. And so around 2013 was when I saw the starfish wasting disease hit, because I went to my, low tide New Year's Eve, and all the starfish were melting away, and there were pieces of them, globs of starfish on the beach and so on. And I felt this deep sense of, it sort of changed my life because I realized something really serious was happening. So I swerved my career into teaching sustainability and so forth. I'm wondering, in terms of the long-term recovery, Alan, what you've noticed on Mearns Rock too. And I mean, I certainly had the impression from much less formal visits that the rocky intertidal area around the jetty and up and down the Edmonds beaches, it just took a dive. I mean, it went from plentiful and lots of interesting critters and plants and algae and things to very surprisingly little. And I haven't seen any real recovery since. And I'm just wondering, is that just my misimpression? Or can you speculate or maybe more informed knowledge about the effects of starfish wasting disease on the intertidal ecology?
Starfish, I can't, don't have much information on except when I look at the what's called the um, multi-agency marine intertidal monitoring program. It's where up and down the coast they've been monitoring the demise and recovery of starfish. But what I do have are these photos at the jetty that confirm what you're thinking.
Mm.
And I guess I haven't really brought those forward in any way or form. So I will do that. And let people see how not only things change seasonally, but also how they degraded. And a lot of my photographs, I see people and kids with buckets and climbing over the rocky intertidal. And I think I don't know whether people are responsible for the lack of recovery or not, but there's certainly more and more visitors to that particular shoreline than there used to be. And I know there's studies done elsewhere on the impact of people on rocky intertidal biota and its demise. So
Yeah. I
I'm
noticed.
debating taking my photos to the city of Edmonds Parks Department and show them just what's going on and all of the people that are climbing over the rocks in the
I
summer.
think you need to do that since they canceled their program that paid rangers to control those crowds. So it's, it's Wild West out there now on low tides.
Yeah.
Yeah, your three keystone species, rockweed, mussels, and barnacles, all of them just crashed
Yep.
when the starfish disappeared and the urchins multiplied, and now the urchins are gone too. And so I wish this were more widely known. People still go there, and I don't think there's any memory. People don't pay close enough attention. The Parks
No.
Department, and this is a microcosm for, Edmonds is one town. I mean, the entire Salish Sea, and I understand from California through Alaska, there must be places like this
Yeah.
where people are noticing things all up and down.
However, my daughter recently went to Deception Pass. There's a protected area there that rangers are on station and they have guide people into the tide pool areas uh, and make sure that they don't walk in certain areas. We don't have that in Edmonds, and I suppose most other communities don't have any kind of a guardian at their shorelines.
Yeah.
Love
Great
the
point.
discussion spanning not only Alaska, but also the local Edmonds side. This is great. David, would you like to go next?
Thank you. Mostly a couple of comments. That Edmonds Rock, the Mearns Rock 2, is very interesting because, a lot of the sites in Prince William Sound do have ice scouring in the winter take place. And seeing that Edmonds one, it almost looks like it had ice scouring, but you don't get ice down there scouring your rocks. And it's significant here. It's hard to describe, but that filamentous algae that we see on Mearns Rockhorn, where I believe that's an algae that comes in after disturbance, like ice scouring. So possibly we're getting more ice scouring, so we're getting more of that algae. I always have to throw in my thing about the oil spill and hot water washing and the impacts of the cleanup, and always have to say that I don't think the cleanup techniques themselves are bad. It was because of mismanagement of those cleanup techniques that did any harm. If some of those workers and some of those managers knew a high tide from a low tide, knew a biologically rich shoreline from a benign one, a lot less impact would have happened. So I worry that is going to be used to not do any cleanup. Because if you don't do the cleanup, yeah, it might recover and catch up the same, but you're leaving all that oil on the shore to contaminate other animals, whether they're a bear walking down on the beach and getting oil on it, or birds getting oil on it because we've left the oil there. So I think we could start looking at better cleanup techniques, definitely. I was wondering on that, I forget the name of the person who mentioned Port Valdez and how the 64 earthquake cleaned out the fjord. I wonder where that's coming, where his statement from that comes from. Just the wave action, if they're still online.
That'd be Wayne Landis.
Well,
Wayne
anyway,
is on, but may have stepped away for a moment.
Okay. I was just curious on that. I'll just say that, Valdez was about at the zero line of uplift and subsidence. So other places like Knight Island had significant, and other locations had uplift and subsidence, while Valdez was at a zero line, and it would have just been some wave action that I'm sure would have impacted certain areas, especially mudflat tide stuff. Thank you very much. It's been a great talk. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for all of your volunteering over the years that have made this photos very possible. Gary, maybe this one's for you. There's just a lot of questions in the chat around comparing cleanup techniques and both what you guys saw on the shoreline, but also if there was any analysis that looked at differences kind of into the water columns and how cleanup has changed as a result of the data and the insights from the program.
Well, I think the main outcome of our study was simply to show that cleanup has its own set of impacts, separate but similar to what happens when oil hits the shoreline. But I think now we factor into cleanup the potential effects of what we do to remove the oil. Every time there's a spill of any size or consequence, people ask, why haven't we gotten better at cleaning up oil? And I think the answer is kind of a two-sided coin. I think we have gotten better. We've reduced the toxicity of things like chemical dispersants. I think, as a result of what we found in our study, we're more judicious in applying the more aggressive techniques that we might have in the proverbial toolbox. But my own perspective is that we're sort of fighting against the laws of physics, because once you put oil on the water or on the shoreline, it reacts to the laws of physics. It spreads, it penetrates into the sediments. And so we're always going to be facing the limitations of what we can do to either get around or use the laws of physics to our advantage. And I think that's where some of the more recent techniques may be coming out of the Deepwater Horizon, the research that looked at improving how we respond to oil spills. I think maybe that is a push for the future. So unfortunately, you know, with the with the drying up of research monies, the research itself begins to fade. So we're kind of in a lull now, and we will be until we have the inevitable next spill.
Thank you, Gary. I really appreciate those reflections and seeing in the chat also discussions that echo some of those themes in terms of how cleanup has changed. We've got a question from Ron Tom about whether Bob Payne had thoughts on the annual variation on fucus and other species that tend to hold space.
As I recall, Bob, as you might expect, thought that we weren't paying enough attention to the real keystone predators in the systems. And I think he suspected that the range of variability that we were observing in our results what was attributable in large part to other factors than the oil spill. In fact, he did publish a paper that kind of critiqued our study. And so Ron, if you would like, I can try to pull that out of the dusty archives.
I'm seeing thumbs up, so that would be great, Gary. Thank you. And knowing we've got just a few minutes left, one of the ones I want to bring up is just this question about, for folks who are interested in finding a Mearns Rock locally and getting involved as volunteers and citizen scientists, if there are any programs in the area that you all would recommend and highlight.
Mm-hmm.
I saw that coastsnap.com got a shout out and mycoast.org. But are there others, Alan, in particular that you're aware of?
I will.
That's fair. I was going to say, I believe Eyes Over Puget Sound also does some crowdsourcing of photos. And certainly shares the sentiment that a picture can be really compelling in terms of showing and communicating the change.
And if I can jump in, I don't think it needs to be anything very formal or under the aegis of a larger program. You can go to your backyard and just take regular photographs of changes in your own little micro habitat, or you know, at a nearby park. I like to visit the San Juan Islands, and I'm amazed at how much change has taken place in the time that I've spent up there at my favorite locations. And I don't speculate on what's causing the change, but it's just kind of astonishing to look at the timeline and understand that the environment is naturally variable. And that's something that we have to factor in whenever we think about our impact on that environment.
Very well put, Gary. Well, we will call it there. I want to be respectful of everybody's time as folks transition to the next meeting of the day, but really appreciate the time and energy for this conversation. We will send out slides and a recording later this week, but thank you again to Alan, Val, and Gary for sharing your insights. All right. Thank you all. Bye.
Mm-hmm.